everybody. My name is Sheila Ghelani. I'm going to read to you. I've written a talk that I delivered at Sideburns in Buzzcut, and some of the residents were there at the same time. And because of this talk that I wrote, they invited me to come here. And I have to say, actually, after hearing residents talk, I probably would have come anyway, so it's just really nice that you actually invited me to read this. So my practice is probably about 20 years old, and my solo practice is about 14 years old. It's like an unruly teenager. So the talk that I'm going to read to you is called a restorative. Okay? And a restorative is something that restores health, strength or well-being, especially in medicine or drink. So I brought a backdrop with me to share with you. It's a picture of an old sailing boat on a large canvas. It was hand-painted to order somewhere overseas and originally bought several years ago over the internet for the final reworking of my show Rapley's Bird. I did quite a few reworkings of that show. It's a bit kitsch, and in the end it never got used because in classic last-minute making fashion, it didn't arrive until after the performance had taken place. Far from ideal. And in the end, if I'm honest, the piece didn't really miss it. It was already stuffed full of far too many objects and bits and bobs. The intention for using it in the first place was to draw attention to many things sea-related, not least colonialism and empire. Something I was trying to work out my personal relationship to because I'm of mixed heritage, Indian and English, and it's a relationship that feels complicated. But anyway, it didn't arrive. And so since then, it's been rolled up in a suitcase, hidden away from view, stored in a forgotten corner of my studio in Deptford. I'm based in London. It's been a gentle but constant reminder of misspent cash, an opportunity missed, artistic folly, waste, and also, just off to the side, unknown hands, hard at work in far off places, unseen. Until now. Because I'd like to engage in what I'm going to describe as a restorative act, an attempt to shake off some of the backdrop's past associations by surrounding it with hue. We're going to unfurl it together, maybe even admire it a little, because it's actually weirdly magnificent, I think. Also, apart from at Buzzcut, no one's really seen it before, which doesn't feel right. So, it's actually massive. So this is going to really disrupt you. I'm really sorry to do this right at the beginning of the day, just as we've all got settled. But I think it's part of what I want. I don't know, it'll make sense. So here it is. So yeah, let's see how this goes. Can we unfurl it together? It is massive, isn't it? We might not manage it. As I said, it is kitsch, but also magnificent. So I don't know if you want to help me. Because I don't know how this is going to happen. Like at Buzzcut, Sideburns, we were in a massive space. Okay. Oh, wow. So yeah, I'll go for this then. So it might actually go over the top of us, I don't know. This is going to be interesting.
Oh, we've got it upside down. Wow.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I'm going to end up underneath. Turn it over so we can see it underneath.
Yeah, and actually maybe later we can take it outside and just look at it outside. That might be the more sensible thing to do. This is great, upside down, I love it. A restorative act.
Now we all lie on the floor apart.
Incredible. And so what I forgot to do at Buzzcut was look at everyone. So I'm just going to look at you surrounding this backdrop, which has sort of been in the dark in my space. So that's incredible. All right. I think we can kind of crumple it up here now. Again, before we left it out in the space and you surrounded it. Thank you. So now there's a massive boat in the room. There's also some liquid, which I've got over there, and some little cups, just because we were going to work towards another restorative. And I'll explain the liquid in a moment. This feels apt. So Govan, which is where obviously the talk was happening that day when I originally wrote it and gave it, it was once the centre of the Clydeside shipbuilding industry. And the building we were sat within that day, the Pearce Institute, was named after William Pearce, manager, amongst other things, of Fairfield's Yard, a yard that in the 1870s would eventually become the biggest in the world. And of course Bristol too, as you will all know so much better than me, it also has a strong history of boat building. I did a bit of quick research, like a day or so ago, and came across Hill House Shipbuilders, later known as Charles Hill and Sons, initially based in the dry docks in Hotwells and later also Albion Yard. And that iteration of that company existed from 1845 through to 1977, which actually feels really recent to me. Also, William Patterson and Sons is another company established by a Scotsman who, after making his way to London to work as a shipwright in Rotherhithe, which is where I live, he had a short but very successful yard or two here in Bristol at East Wapping. He most famously became involved in the construction of Brunel's boat, the Great Western, which I'm sure you'll hear about quite a lot. So archives and online databases hold extraordinary detail about all of the boats built in both Govan and Bristol, and I've got lost in them several times, attracted to sections on Clyde-built ghost ships such as the SS Briar Rose and SV Knight of St Michael, boats struck down by typhoons such as the SS Uganda, that was recently in the 1980s, and ships declared a total loss, Orion, Gallant, Lurcher, Juno. And in the Bristol research, I also like the sound of two steam packets called Lady Charlotte and the Mountaineer, and also the East Indiaman called Fame. It's their names that have been drawing me in, I've realised, beguiling in their own way, suggestive of characters, stories and feelings, but also acting as a kind of screen against me thinking really deeply about more unseen hands at work, those that did the building of the ships, manoeuvring in water and at times desperate swimming as their vessels crashed against rocks or capsized in bad weather. Also, the actual purpose that some of the boats were in reality built for. We're not just talking about paddle steamers here, but ships built to carry loot, to defend, to shoot. And there's actually nothing romantic about that, and that's really important to remember. Hill House, for example, was actually built on the back of money made through the slave trade and privateering, essentially legalised piracy. And Patterson and Sons made several gunboats, including HMS Ernest and HMS Escort. So nowadays, most of those shipyards no longer exist. However, Fairfields in Govan, according to what I could find out online, is still in use. And most interestingly of all, to me at least, now part of BAE Systems Maritime naval ships, a subsidiary company of BAE Systems PLC. BAE Systems PLC, British multinational defence, security and aerospace company, providers of weaponry and warships to the Ministry of Defence. I'm sure that none of this is news to you, but suddenly we're in deep. Just the tiniest bit more research reveals the name of 6 Type 45 destroyer ships built in BAE Govan. And the programme office of that, which I found in a random document online a couple of days, was also in Filton, near Bristol. I have no idea what a programme office does, but I think it's really interesting that they have a link too with that site in Govan and BAE Systems Maritime. So the names of those 6 Type 45 destroyer ships I discovered were Daring, Defender, Dragon, Diamond, Dauntless, and Duncan. Duncan, like before, seems funny as a name for a destroyer, until I read that the ship is equipped with something called the Sea Viper missile system. I start to look this up on the internet, but catch myself feeling uneasy. How did I get here? Typing Sea Viper missile system into a search engine. What am I trying to understand? Shipbuilding has always been inextricably linked to war and trade, and there's no use pretending otherwise. So time to listen to that instinct, that feeling in my belly, and tack off in another direction for a while. Purposefully even. Towards a couple of threads of thought also woven into the fabric of this image that's sort of crumpled on the floor actually. We're not really gathered around it, but I feel like they're equally important to share with you and also in need of some unfolding. Like the fact that rediscovering the backdrop wasn't really by chance. So unfortunately, the building my studio is in has rather stereotypically been bought by a developer. And so I've been going through a process of clearing it out, discarding what I don't need, preparing to move on, attempting to downsize, as next time I'll be sharing a space with my longtime collaborator Marty Langthorne. My own space, of course, being impossible to afford. The process of sorting through what's in my studio has felt particularly odd. Not only because soon my battered, leaky workspace will be the kitchen of someone far more well off than me, but because I've been forced to look face on at the detritus and stuff collected around my artwork. And think about what it all means. So what pieces might I never show again? What exactly have I been spending my money on all of these years? Why did I think I needed all of those glass ampoules, flower presses, broken hearts, umbrellas, types of glitter, nurses' outfits, watches, fake hedging, that amp, those spices, knick-knacks, tiny toys, precious stones, I could go on. Whilst others have been out buying houses, I've been out buying slideshow viewers. This oddness of looking through the traces of my own labour has been exacerbated by a parallel clearing out I've been engaged in, this time of a domestic space, as I've unexpectedly over the last few weeks had to help my mum move my grandmother, her mum, into full-time care. We've had to empty her rented flat, talk to lawyers, go through her private papers, pack up keepsakes, recycle, donate and watch once prized furniture get broken up with an axe. It's felt brutal, incredibly moving and exhausting in equal measure. Happily, Gran is now settled in her new space, a care home she herself was once the cook for when she was in her early 20s, which offers some kind of comforting circularity about the vulnerability of her situation. Now 95, there's a palpable sense that hers is a life at a very particular tipping point. She's been alive for nearly a century. What an incredible, robust, lucky thing, given all that's happening in the world. Yet so full of fragility, despite her stately age. In a way, it feels as though she's already disappeared, just out of sight, become submerged. Ghost ship-like, so dependent on the care of others. I mention this because spending time with her and Mum over the last few weeks has seeped into my bones, into my fingers, and affected how I've sifted through my own studio stuff. Archiving flyers and reviews, evidence of a set of extraordinary experiences and small contributions to practice that I've played a part of, has felt anything but. Instead, alerted by Gran's slow drift elsewhere, I followed her beneath the surface and found illuminated more starkly than ever all of those troublesome conditions of artistic making, just hanging there, brazenly out in the open. The lack of thought about longevity, of how to age well in relation to artistic output. The airplane and car fumes, so many vapour trails, so much pollution. The long hours and little money, the endless application writing. How many hours have we all spent on those? What could we have all been doing with that time instead? The lack of any real security, and any money that was floating about, now embodied in odd ephemera, in my studio at least, such as this backdrop. Yes, these are precarious times, and yes, I am at an edge teetering. but it is relative. Right now, compared to many artists, I'm actually in a position of some privilege. I've got lots of work behind me. I've got some funding that will last me until autumn. Currently, I'm obsessed by elements and elementals, alert to the connectivity between everything on a material, economic and environmental level. And I'm still full of the poetics of having spent the last 2 years staring into hedges with others. How lucky is that? It's like incredible. So probably I just need to get over myself. And of course, these are the moments that art can be best for, these fragile moments, to help process a tipped world that consistently favours a few, a way to respond to and cope with all of the good and bad decisions that get made daily. To make space for those people just out of sight, like Gran, for instance, and ideas, and to reflect on and remember those histories that have been disappeared from view, sometimes by accident, sometimes purposefully, unseen but still reverberating, like a colonial past, not over and done with as yet, held in stories of boats, waiting to be uncovered. I've always been interested in such themes in invisibility and race, my own mixed heritage apparently missing in plain sight, also in care. I've long explored this theme through context and content, working in hospitals, care homes, schools, libraries, anywhere and everywhere, probably like most of you in this room as well. My own current, very inexpert interest in boats and shipbuilding also stems from my own project Rambles with Nature, a body of work that was begun in 2013 exploring the hedgerow. The project's now almost complete, apart from one unruly ramble which refuses to end, which is a collaboration with Sue Palmer, who's over there, and is speaking later. Early on in our research, Sue and I stumbled across the story of a great hedge planted across India to tax salt as part of the East India Company's transnational business. It sounds like an unlikely story, but is in fact true. So they planted this hedge across the whole of India, which is like the Great Wall of China, to act as a border so that they could collect money, I guess, on salt, a basic thing that all humans need. And nobody really knows about this. So 2 years on, we're still deep inside our research about the East India Company, the precursor of the modern multinational, with a trading empire that once encircled the globe, made possible by boats, of course, and a lot of brutality. The trail has now led Sue and I towards investigating 3 East India ships, which were wrecked off the Dorset coast, and recently we attended a conference on the maritime archaeology of the company in Bournemouth. That day we heard lots of surprising stories about various types of boat, connecting coasts, countries and ports, about dives, treasure and how to identify cannons recovered from a seabed. But nowhere, not once, was there even a hint of talking about what those cannons were made for, about the people strapped to such cannons and literally shot through the body as a lesson to others. That's a form of execution called blowing from a gun. And it was most famously employed by the British Empire during the Sepoy Mutiny. Nor even the social and political impact of the company itself. So events unseen but still reverberating. It was so surprising to me, not to see. And just like that, I'm right back on course. I can feel the fire in my belly again, myself turning away from the trickier parts of being an artist, happy to be involved, happy to be looking in the directions many of us don't have time to, grateful to be able to drop in and out of disciplines and be a cross-pollinator of ideas. There is a very real possibility that in a decade or so I might have become literally worn out by practice, something else I can feel in my bones, from all the carrying of odd items on trains, like this backdrop. I'm not sure it was worth bringing it, but I think so. It was great. Yeah. And what else? From the unbelievably boring task of packing up and moving my studio again, because this isn't the first time it's happened and it definitely won't be the last, and the stomach churning risk of it all. But for now, sat around here, I'm still very much on board. I'm reminded of a Kathy Acker quote that I've carried around in my notebooks for years. I've shared it before in public, and it seems appropriate to share here. It's from her essay Algeria, published in the semiotext reader Hatred of Capitalism. Introducing the essay, she writes, "A series of invocations because nothing else works." So yes, I'm committed to keep on making despite the precarity, but also because of it, to address it. So there's room to consider a life in its middle age, a life at its end. So there's the space to think about ships and all that they carry with them, and examine disappearances from view, to spend time in rooms like this, because as Aka identifies, sometimes nothing else works, which feels like a really appropriate place to stop. Now in Buzzcut we took in a second restorative here, which was a pale ale, originally brewed by the East India Company, which was for the people crewing their ships. That's the origin of all pale ales. But it's a bit early for that, I reckon. Maybe not for some. So actually I have got some rosewater, which is bought from the East India Company, which is now, that sounds really weird, but basically someone has bought the East India Company rights and they have a shop, and it's an Indian, so it is someone trying to claim back the history, but they're also trading on the trademark and using that trademark as a symbol of like a stamp of approval, which it's just like, it just blows my mind. It's really interesting. And me and Sue bought the rosewater together about a month ago, yeah, in the middle of London. But I think we should maybe do that at lunch, because I feel like we need to just move on to the next speaker. But when you do sip the rosewater, if you do, this is what I feel like we're drinking towards. I feel like this is what it's a restorative for. So it's to the unfurling of images in public with others, to our ever-changing studio spaces, may they keep us all warm, and also our ideas sharp, and to art, to us, and also to this day ahead, which we'll be spending together. Thank you. Hold it up.
People hot.
It is hot, yeah.
There's like a weird air conditioning thing, maybe we'll try it.
I'll do it.
Where's the edge? I've got two corners here.
And feel free
Yeah,
to
and I've
get
got
tea
two
and
corners
coffee and
here,
drinks
so we're
like
doing, yeah,
between us.